Hello and welcome. The state of Gujarat has now seen over 16,000 COVID cases, and the number of deaths also continue to climb. Mortality rate in that state stands at about 6.1%, a little higher than most other parts of the country. The other question that we are trying to pose is why is it that morbidity or mortality rates are higher in some places, including Ahmedabad or for that matter Mumbai, and what could be the underlying reasons behind it? And also, let's try and understand what is the infrastructure readiness, preparedness, and response, particularly from a public health perspective in the state of Gujarat, and more specifically Ahmedabad, which has and is facing the brunt of the coronavirus cases. To discuss this, I'm joined by Jayanti Ravi, Principal Secretary, Health and Family Welfare, Government of Gujarat. Jayanti, thank you very much for joining us.
Namaste.
So first question, could you tell us, walk us through what you're seeing behind the numbers or beyond the numbers that you have today?
So basically, we realize that this is something unprecedented. It's something new that the whole world and the whole country is grappling with. And we are also seeing that the numbers are, they are high. But we are also realizing that in the process, this is also we are really building up on our capabilities. For example, much beyond the first, we had a bit of a lead time, if I can use that word. It so happened that the first case in Gujarat only happened around 19th of March, as against many parts of the country which had started having cases earlier. So we also realized that we got a little bit of time to prepare ourselves in terms of the infrastructure to be ready to cope with things should they really go from bad to worse. And one of the things we also looked at that time is how do we build our infrastructure. So we had a brand new 1,200 bed hospital, which was inaugurated by the Honorable PM exactly a year ago. So we decided to convert that in Ahmedabad city into a dedicated COVID care hospital, and similarly in 4 of our cities and so on. So while on the one hand we did this preparation, we also really ramped up our surveillance efforts, and we were perhaps the first state initially to do a complete door-to-door survey across rural areas and the urban areas way back in March and so on. So it also gave us a bit of a handle. Our entire health staff was also a little more primed into this act of being ready for it. Simultaneously, we also decided to build on immunity, particularly for the elderly comorbid and for entire populations where we found that the infection, there was a greater probability. At that time, it was traveler-based, foreign traveler. So wherever these nuclei were there, and then now across the state, whether it's the Ayush system of Ayurveda, homeopathy, we're really pushing this also in a big way. The other thing we're also focusing on is taking a lot of help and collaboration with the private sector. For example, we've had some leading pulmonologists, critical care specialists, intensivists who've been working with us for more than a month and a half in different capacities, actually visiting our hospital on a daily basis, looking at cases, helping figure out what could be certain better ways and so as a result of it, we've also started many new practices like this prone, when somebody's on ventilator care, we now use the prone position, which means the person lies on the belly, and we're also doing something called tele-mentoring. So this has been going on now for about 1.5 months, where a group of experts are seated in Ahmedabad, and we have a tele-mentoring session every day from 12:30 to about 1:30, where our the ICUs, those who are dealing with COVID patients across the state, they're interacting with them, sharing their best practices. And the last thing here is also about research. We've also invested a lot of time and efforts also in different kinds of trials, interventions. For example, now tocilizumab, which is a medicine which is the fact that, the autopsies in Italy have shown, we understand that this is also because of coagulation. So we're using these medicines also very extensively. So these are some of the things that explain the whole backdrop of where we are.
Right. Right. Okay. Now, if I were to go into the numbers specifically now, so what are the trends that you're seeing, and are they different from the rest of the country? When I say trends, I mean in the deaths that we've had or the fatality that you've seen. Is the composition different? Are there any further insights that doctors are giving you in terms of why it's happening at a higher clip than maybe other parts of the country?
So we've been doing a very detailed death audit as well. And of course, I also want to share that we were perhaps one of the first states to put in place a detailed protocol, including the use of hydroxychloroquine way back end of March and much later, even the protocol of AIIMS also more or less echoed the same thing. So we've had a team of doctors from the private sector and the government sector who've been working on all of this, the protocols, etc. But if you look at the death audits, we do find that there are certain features that come out. For example, nearly 83% of those that have unfortunately died belong to the age group which is beyond 45. And specifically, if you look at the age group beyond 60, it's nearly 60%, 59.7 to be precise, percent of those who have unfortunately died are more than 60 years of age. And the proportion of deceased among the really young group, 1 to 14, is as low as 0.9%. The other factor here is also about comorbidities. Very interestingly, we find that of those who have died, unfortunately, we find that a majority of them, 89% of them, were either comorbid or were in the high risk category, that is above 60 years of age or less than 10 years of age. And here too, a large number of them, nearly 43%, had multiple comorbidities, etc. And if we look at the group which had no comorbidity and no risk factor, it's only 11%. So this again shows that 89% were a little vulnerable, little more vulnerable than the rest. And so this is also throwing a lot of light on what is probably the underlying condition. So we've also been very transparent, open about reporting all the deaths. So the numbers are more. I mean, and so if you see these numbers, they are on the higher side, but we feel that these are some of the factors. There's another fact which seems to be, this is still a conjecture or you can say it's a surmise, but some of our top doctors were also experts on infectious disease. They have been saying from the beginning that perhaps the strain of the virus which is here is not, there are two strains apparently, the S strain and the L strain. While there have been some reports to say that this may not be valid, but we still feel, and we are in the process of trying to do some more evidence-based and research using we have a facility here called the Gujarat Biotechnology Research Center, and actually trying to see if we can identify, detect these strains and figure it out. So the perception of these experts, some of them, is that perhaps what we have is the more virulent L strain.
Right. And any sense on what comorbidities these are which form the larger proportion that is contributing to the fatality?
So we've done this detailed mapping of this. So increasing, we find that the maximum 61% of those that have died had very high blood pressure, hypertension. Then there are about 48%, nearly 50% of them had diabetes mellitus, again, very high sugars. Other than this, we have also comorbidities ranging from ischemic heart disease, thyroid disorders, chronic kidney diseases, lung diseases. We've also had pulmonary TB patients and liver disorders, psychiatric illnesses, cancer, stroke, and so on. Surprisingly, we've also had people with conditions like a completely immunocompromised situation like HIV/AIDS coming out of it. So while on the one hand we do find such, but we're also seeing instances of people who have some of these and multiple comorbidities as well, and also elderly people also coming out of it. So it's a multiplicity. It does seem a little complex, but this pattern that is being seen in those that are unfortunately dying.
Right. And any sense at this point, I know I know all the data is still not in, but when you look at it, from if you cast your eye over it, are any of these data points different from maybe other parts of the country?
I wouldn't want to venture a guess yet. Okay. We've really not done that kind of a comparison, but we are actively looking at, and we would be open to. So we have these experts, and just yesterday, we've constituted a state-level task force with nine very eminent doctors primarily from the private sector, but we also have people like public health experts like Dr. Dilip Mavlankar, and we also have people like Dr. Tejas Patel, Dr. Pankaj Shah, who've done a lot of work on community health and so on, not only in their capacity of cancer and so on, but also otherwise. So, and we have been in touch with all these experts, but we've still not been able to really see a very clear pattern or a distinguishing feature vis-a-vis other states and other regions of India.
Right. Okay. Walk us through your infrastructure. I mean, how many beds do you have? Again, let's talk about Ahmedabad specifically, because like we said earlier, that's where most of your cases are. How many are in private? How many in public? What is the utilization? For instance, are all, what capacity utilization are the hospitals running? And how many of them have either most of their nurses and doctors still there, and so on?
So if we talk of Ahmedabad, the first thing we set about, as I mentioned, was a brand new hospital, which was the new maternal and child health hospital with 1,200 beds. Of course, that also includes the NICU beds, etc. Because you do have COVID cases. We've had a large number of deliveries of women who are COVID positive, which have happened here. We've also had very complicated surgeries happening there of COVID positive people and so on. So this was the first facility that we set up. But when we felt that perhaps the number of beds there, for example, when we felt the ventilator beds, ICU beds, etc., needed some more expansion, we have a Medicity complex right there around the civil hospital in Ahmedabad. So we have a cancer research institute, which is GCRI, Gujarat Cancer Research Institute. We have a very good quality tertiary coronary heart diseases center called the UN Mehta center. Similarly, the Institute of Kidney Diseases. So we also roped in beds of these. And if you may also be aware that way back in March, we also took a decision, like perhaps other parts of India, to try and push back some of the scheduled surgeries. We felt that planned surgeries could be pushed back because we didn't want this nosocomial and also the hospital acquired infection, etc., when we felt COVID was happening in a big way, or there was a possibility that COVID could really, given that a large number of travelers from abroad. And then we also had the special point of inflection where in Ahmedabad, given the Nizamuddin event, we found that the numbers suddenly again went up. That was another factor that pushed up the numbers. And these came from those areas, parts of Gujarat, where the population is also very, it's very crowded. Houses where in a single room, you sometimes have as many as 10 to 15 people staying. You literally take shifts and staying. So with the result, the spread happened much faster in some of these areas. But given this, we decided to expand out to these other facilities, such as the cancer hospital and so on. So we have about 1,200 beds at the civil hospital, 262 beds, and all these are oxygen beds at the GCRI, 202 beds at the Institute of Kidney Diseases, and with excellent human resources there in terms of doctors, residents, nursing staff, the entire team, interns.
And all these staff are there. I mean, for instance, when I talk to hospitals in cities like Mumbai and Delhi, many hospitals are running at maybe 40 to 50% capacity because they don't have doctors and nurses right now.
So the story is similar, but I would say it's not as bleak in the sense that we've had our basic residents, interns. We've also taken a conscious decision that we're going to push the PG exams till after August, because we want these interns and the residents primarily to continue, because they are a major, shall I say, load-bearing structure in this whole thing. Right? You do have faculty members, but a lot of this pressure is being borne, and they're doing outstanding work, our residents there. So with the result, we have a larger pool. We'll have the new PG students joining in by the beginning of next month. So that is there. And as far as nurses, etc. are concerned, we've also supplemented these in a very big way. Fortunately, the spread of the disease, it's not as if it's monotonically happening or simultaneously happening across the state. We have some portions where the cases haven't picked up. So we have places from where we've deployed a large number of doctors, residents, etc., nurses. So we're doing this constantly, optimal utilization by rotating staff from other portions. The other thing we've also done is also roped in the Indian Medical Association in we've also listed out a large number of their doctors who are available. But the other thing we've done is we've also gotten a very large number of private hospitals across the state. So these in different districts, including Ahmedabad city, these are also available, and we've come up with a very interesting pattern where 50% of the beds would be for their own private patients, for which there's these are cashless patients for the hospitals, and then there's a rate which is lower. So we have this differential tariff. So we're looking at, possible ways of innovatively trying to think out of the box and see how we can leverage the private hospitals, their staff, their infrastructure, their resources also to cope with COVID.
So have you taken over 50% of private hospital capacity in the state? Is that what you're saying?
We've done this in Ahmedabad city as of now.
Okay.
And as I said, in almost all the districts, we have a dedicated COVID hospital as well. So these are in addition to the public sector hospitals. So those are completely taken over, or they're being dedicated for COVID. I wouldn't use the word taken over because it's their own staff which is running it in most cases. But it is something which is offered free of cost for the citizens. cashless
Right.
for them. And
Right.
government is...
Right, and you mentioned ventilators. I mean, now when you look at the numbers, and you said that you have done some at least a first layer of deep dive. What is the proportion of patients who are going into, let's say, critical care, and then obviously facing the next round of problems?
So we do have data now. If we look at another indicator, the patients who, if you look at those that unfortunately died, if we see the number of the patients who were on ventilators, we find that that's also pretty high. I have the statistics with me. I think nearly of those that passed away, nearly 77.9%, which is nearly 78% of those that unfortunately died were on ventilators. So now we're trying to have a more nuanced approach. One of the things that also emerges is that if you look at breathlessness as a symptom, I'm sure this is there are many manifestations, including diarrhea in some cases, sore throat, cough, fever, but we find that the way it's manifesting here, 85% of those that have unfortunately passed away also, one of the major manifestations was breathlessness. So one of the things we've been doing now over the last 1.5 to 2 months is that right from surveillance, we are really fortifying all our health workers in the city and other places with pulse oximeters to see the SpO2 saturation, and with enough care to make sure that this doesn't, because you're actually pegging the oximeter onto the fingers. So we're also sanitizing it before it's used elsewhere, taking care. So this is one of the things we're starting at the level of surveillance, on the door-to-door level, at the house-to-house level. But additionally, if you look at the hospital, with this increasing realization that ventilators should be the last resort, so we're trying to have a more nuanced approach, and we're trying to see if people can be put on plain oxygen. So we're increasing the number of oxygen beds. Fortunately, we don't have a problem of supply of oxygen or availability. So most of these beds are oxygen beds. Then we're also looking at the high flow nasal cannula. So this is again something that really with a high frequency as well, high frequency, high flow. So you can actually tweak the frequency and the volume that is flowing, so that's found to give very good results. And then we're also looking at the non-return breathing masks, NRBM as they called, and then the BiPAP. So instead of directly having to escalate a patient, intubate them into the ventilator,
right, high pressure oxygen, yeah,
we're trying to do these transitions and really prevent having to escalate it to the ventilator, because we realize that once they go on ventilators, chances of their coming back get minimized. And again, on ventilator care, as we discussed, we're doing this awake or conscious proning, which means they lie on their belly. This is also found to show a lot of results. So we're trying all these initiatives, efforts.
Right. And are you okay in terms of number of ventilators? I mean, there's been some reports about the kind of ventilators and whether those are the right ones and so on. But in overall, how are you doing in terms of the number of ventilators, at least on standby? I think it is accepted now that we don't need as many as perhaps we thought we did in February or March, but you do need some.
So when we look at the context, way back in March, when we were really trying to ramp up our infrastructure, we realized that world over, this was a common cry that we're hearing from all these countries, that there was an acute shortage of ventilators. And it was absolutely, it seemed, and it was impossible to import ventilators, which is where you get typically some of these ventilators from, high-end ventilators and so on. So we felt we had to also be self-sufficient, and so we encouraged. I still remember a meeting with the Gujarat Chamber of Commerce people when they came. And when they asked us, what is it that you need? One of the facts we said was there might be an acute shortage of ventilators. And so this led to local people, and this has happened across the country, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world too, where people have tried to be really resilient and create these equipments, fabricate them so that the countries become self-reliant and are able to cope with it. So we've also had help from some of these quarters, including donations. We've had ventilators, and today we are reasonably comfortable. We have 2,111 ventilators dedicated for COVID, which is much more than we need on an average per day, about 50 patients on ventilators. And as I said, as our understanding of the disease is getting more and more clearer, I'm echoing the sentiment of our experts, the doctors, we feel that we really don't want to use ventilators to the extent possible. But so we're getting in more of these other facilities in between being on room air to having to intubate a person.
Right. Right. Last question, Jayanti, as we're running out of time. So, as you look ahead now, how are you seeing for yourself the 2 or 3 key challenges and tasks in terms of containing this disease, and also, of course, handling the lifting of the lockdown, which is now underway?
So now there are 3, 4 very interesting things that I'm sure people would have noticed. One is that also in terms of patient care, one of the things that happened here is being infectious hospitals, you can't have family members go there. So that has also been a bit of a challenge. Simultaneously, these family members were also in quarantine as a part of the contact tracing and so on. So you had this situation which is very peculiar to this disease. But simultaneously now, initially you had 1 or 2 people coming in, the rest of the community, so you quarantined them and so on. So now we're giving a lot of emphasis on reverse quarantine, because you can't have 70% or, because with the lockdown lifted or in this unlock paradigm, you're going to have more and more people moving about. But what you can do is those 10% of the people who are elderly, comorbid, if we can really ring fence them, insulate them, and this has to come with a big social and behavior change campaign, which we are pushing in a very big way, and trying to see how we can really fortify their immunity and how we can have pulse oximeters and such other measures on a daily basis happening. Those that can afford it, we can have them, keep one of these at home. But otherwise, the health workers are actually going house to house and measuring the oxygen saturation. And again, learning to live with COVID. So one of the things is we notice is obesity, diabetes. We're also looking at blood pressure, hypertension, all these non-communicable diseases. So I think it's also a very big wake-up call for all of us to look at the NCDs and look at more the preventive aspect than the curative aspect, which we've been very often articulating. But it's only when you have a situation like this that everybody gets a shake-up, as it were, very unfortunately a very hard and a very difficult shake-up. But if you really look at this, I think it could be a way of really looking back at our own lifestyle and seeing what is it that we need to do. And we also realize we need more of these community practitioners. So this whole emphasis of Ayushman Bharat, of having community health officers and all this, is actually overwhelmingly articulating the fact. This has shown us we need more of those kind of people who can actually walk from at the subcenter level and ensure that the lifestyle of people, that the surveillance, preventive aspects are taken care of. You do need intensivists, cardiologists as well. But I think some of these were over-exaggerated, the importance of these vis-a-vis the others. We need both. But I think the preventive side, community side needs more. Similarly, nurse practitioners, because this has acutely brought out the need for a great shortage in terms of the qualified manpower. So do we really need all those academically inflated set of skilled manpower, or could we do with a bunch of larger number of people with a smaller set of but really good at their job? So we could have even now think of having a bunch of skilled people who are maybe even 10th dropout, 12th dropout, but if they can really be skilled on patient care, community, surveillance and so on. So if we really try to tweak some of these, and with this purpose, we're also trying to simultaneously with this come up with a medium-term, short-term, long-term strategy for Gujarat as a whole with all these experts to see what is it that we should be doing and where should our focus be more on. So these are some of the learnings immediately. But again, coming back, it's not about fighting this virus or driving it away, but I think it's about protecting ourselves. So it is in our hands, literally, and pun intended too. If things like hand wash, if we really take care of each other, and then also ring fence our elderly, which has also been a very culturally, this is something which is a very inherent part of our tradition across communities. So if we can again reinforce these measures and have more and more of people from the community, it could be religious leaders, other opinion leaders, also articulate this very clearly. Because vaccine, we don't know, it may cost a lot, but as they say, a 10 rupee soap, simple mask, it could just be a simple cotton mask such as this. But I think this would go a long way. So it's about, clearly understanding it, not just by force and not just by mandate, but if every person were to internally realize the importance, I think we can deal with it much better.
Right. Jayanti, Ravi, thank you so much for speaking with us. I wish you and your team all the best in the battle that lies ahead. And I do hope to come back and check with you as you start getting more insights from your the committee that you've instituted and other data points around how this disease is progressing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Namaste.